How are you?
Where's Rich back? Disappeared.
He's ready to guys.
I'm hiding.
Where's Bill Malcolm? Is he around somewhere?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, he wasn't here last week either.
No, I haven't seen him.
I know, but I talked to him today.
Brian
Only if
Spence?
you want it.
Hi, Dina.
Hi, Dina.
Janet's here.
We have Chris Ramsden on.
Yeah.
It's an oldie.
And we have Vince. And we have Jonathan.
I'm not too good
Vince and
at
Jonathan are both on?
Say what?
Vince and Jonathan?
Can you get the audience?
And I have
I'm not very good.
Scott.
What can I do?
Oh,
I got him.
Yeah.
You did.
I got him.
Sorry.
Somebody just drove out there, the big truck.
All right, let's call it 7 o'clock and call to order. Yeah, 1900 for us, ex-military. All right, we have the draft minutes of the 11th that was sent out this afternoon. Do I hear any changes, corrections, additions, or subtractions?
I have a very minor, I
Let
shouldn't bring up.
me move them first,
Yeah.
and then you can second them.
Judy moved, Wilk second.
No, I second. There's a very minor tautology in the last line of it. It's just an extra word crossing out.
Which is,
Look at the last line. It just says seconded by Mr. Spence, seconded.
Yes.
So I'm gonna cross out a duplicate second.
oh, you get that? Second is said twice.
Yeah, gotcha.
And I think Jonathan Vogel was on Zoom last week, and I think his name wasn't.
Okay. I actually don't think
I don't know if he wasn't last week, we
He
can
was there
ask
the
him.
week before.
Okay, then I am mistaken.
All right.
He was there.
I'll email him and ask him.
Okay.
Are these yours or are they like?
Nope, they're handouts.
Okay.
All right, continued discussion of the school operating budget and money warning articles. And we were gonna. Oh. I thought we had.
We didn't vote on them.
No.
Oh, all right,
Zoom
those
right
in
through
favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, I guess it's unanimous.
Okay.
All right, now, am I allowed to go on? All right, Jen's gonna get you've got the handout here from her of I'll call them PowerPoint slides. And I asked her to go through it fairly quickly because we do have quite a bit to cover today.
Should I log in? Can I share my screen for those
You can.
people? Yeah, okay, I'm gonna do that. Sorry, Dick.
All right, can you start with your, it should look like this.
Comparison of costs?
Yeah.
So, I have,
And I'll
do I
just
have the
say-
wrong link?
I'll say if they're at home, they can go on their town webpage and it's right there. There's a green bar on the front page that says 2023 budget and all the sheets are there.
Do we wanna just have them do that? When I click on the link, it tells me the meetings next week. Oh, because I'm in the wrong.
You're on the wrong one.
I'm on the wrong
Yeah.
one. Somebody just posted it on the list.
Oh,
Alright, let me
No,
find.
they posted that wrong.
See, you can't rely on the listserv. Here I go. I should be able to get in now. Muted.
Either that or could use your paper copy, like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Well, no, I wanted to put it on the screen so people who are watching on Zoom will be able to see it. Right.
Well, they can go on there.
Are you computer savvy people figured out how to make it work for them?
All right. I think I've done it, and I
Yeah,
think people
you
at
did.
home should be able to see it.
It's there.
All right, so the goal is to try to get through these slides relatively quickly, so I'm gonna try to zoom through. But I just wanna give them some context and just present them So essentially, this is a deck of slides that the finance committee of the school board put together in an effort to try to explain what data we used to come to some of the decisions that we came to as a committee, in terms of, you know, like approaching the school budget this year. So to start off, we identified 17 schools in New Hampshire that operate schools like Lyme. And if people have seen me give these types of presentations before, you'll be familiar with my goal of creating these apples to apples comparisons. So I generally steer away from comparing us to state averages because this state, there's just many different schools across the state and the schools look very different. You have really large schools in Manchester, Nashua, and Concord, and they're just never gonna be comparable to a school like ours. So these 17 schools, basically to create this list, I applied 3 filters to the full list of public schools in the state by first limiting to schools that had 150 to 300 students, and then remove districts that operate their own middle school, and then remove districts that operate their own high school. So what you're looking at here are 17 schools that operate either a K-8, a pre-K through 8, or a K through 6 school. And then they either, if they don't have a middle school, they're either tuitioning out or they're participating as a cooperative, and you can see that there. And in the last column, you can see the fiscal year 22 ADM, so that's average daily attendance essentially, so that's the number of kids that were resident in that school in fiscal year 22, which is essentially last year. So the one thing that I'll point out here, what you'll see is that there really aren't very many schools that operate as an SAU with only one school in it. Our school happens to be one of them. Grantham is another, and then Plainfield is another. And I marked Plainfield because Plainfield actually shares SAU administrative costs with Cornish. And when they did that, and Frank is here, and Frank served as superintendent of Plainfield and kind of oversaw that decision to start sharing those costs. And Plainfield and Cornish's both cost per pupil, and I'll talk about cost per pupil on the next slide, came down somewhat significantly in sort of starting to share those costs. So just to make the point, it's relatively expensive to run an SAU with one school in it, because you lose the opportunity to share administrative costs and then also share some of the costs that you might have among personnel inside your school. So we also looked at the characteristics, the fiscal characteristics of the communities that operate these 17 listed schools, and they're pretty varied. And one metric that I want to point out is equalized value per pupil, which is the 5th column. So equalized value per pupil is a metric that DOE uses as a measure of a town's capacity to raise funds to support education. And to calculate that number, you basically take the total town equalized assessed value, which is in the previous column, and divide it by the total number of students that attend public school in any given year, and that's your equalized value per pupil. And you can see that it ranges, I think across the state, we're a little bit above average at $1.6 million for the state, and a little bit above average for the median of this list here as well. One thing that does vary pretty significantly is median town household income, where Lyme, probably unsurprising to a lot of people here, stands out as one of the highest, not the highest on the list, but you see there's a really pretty wide distribution of household incomes that you see in that column. The other thing to point out, because people always say this, is that, wow, we spend so much money, what's such a large proportion of our taxes go to support local education, and that number is about 60%. That's pretty true for almost every town and municipality in New Hampshire, and I think you see that on this list, where 62.4% of our taxes in 2021 were represented as the local education property tax, which isn't too far from the median on the list.
What is Bartlett?
Oh, Bartlett? Yeah, Bartlett is, this would get it, it's an outlier. To some degree. Bartlett, I haven't been to Bartlett, I think it's a ski town. They have a significant number of second homes. And what you're seeing is how what you're seeing here is how a town in New Hampshire makes the system as we have it today kind of work for itself. They have a significantly higher equalized valuation in their town relative to most towns in the state, and their equalized value per pupil at $6.5 million is off the chart, which is why their local education tax rate is $2.74. Their total tax rate in Bartlett is $5.87, or at least it was in fiscal year '22. That's, it's an outlier, it's not the most, I'm gonna call it,
Lincoln is another one like
I'm gonna
that.
call it egregious. Molten Borough is at like, they have about $9 million in equalized value per pupil. It is a lot easier for those towns to raise funds to support their schools than it is for our district and a lot of districts. And that's because they develop, in part, and they can, you know, there's different ways to look at it.
Well, they have
They-
a lot of fancy second homes with no kids going to school, right?
That's part of it. I mean, I don't know how many of those. They also have businesses pay property tax too, and that ski resort pays property tax to the town. So there's a lot, you know, but they made a decision as a town at some point in time to develop in that way. And it's two-pronged. One, they could, right, because they had the ski mountain to support the development, but nevertheless. Moving on, because we don't want to spend too much time, but yeah, but Bartlett is it's something of an outlier. So if we flip over to the 5th slide, so looking at that list, we also further kind of subdivided it into a peer group, right? Assigning schools that look like Lyme socioeconomically, and those are the ones highlighted in yellow. The list is now sorted in ascending order for the percent of students that are identified as being economically disadvantaged, which New Hampshire DOE measures as those kids that are eligible for free or reduced lunch. And that 0.55%, I double checked, that's not an error. That's just, in Hampton Falls, that's how low their free reduced school lunch rate is. So this list, we go as high as 52% of the kids in Tamworth attend a school and are eligible for free reduced lunch. We are below the median for the list at about 10%. And so it's somewhat arbitrary. I called it,
Jen, unmute
Yep.
yourself so they can hear you, but for some reason.
oh, you can't hear?
For some
Oh,
reason.
sorry.
Okay.
Oh, see, it is
So
working
that's
now.
not, I know it's not gonna work.
I'm sorry, when people can come here, now to sit with
No, I
us,
can't turn it off though. Oh, there it goes.
Yeah,
Do you
see,
want me to
it's
try
gonna-
to hit?
It's gonna make it, I don't know why it's doing it, it's never done this before. But it's doing it
Oh,
because
you
it's
might-
doing it through your computer and mine.
can you turn that thing off?
Can Jen mute
That, then
herself?
they really won't be able to hear.
Okay, is that any better?
Is that better, guys?
Now we have to turn this back on
You
again.
try this? Is that any better? Otherwise, we'll just carry
I'm
on
waiting to
either
hear.
way.
Yes, it's better.
Perfect.
All right, let's go.
Thank you.
All right, yep, so it's somewhat arbitrary, but you see that Lyme at 10% is, you know, far from the highest, and we're lower than median. The other rationale I used to group this is, taking those towns that had household incomes that, you know, look like Lyme. So the ones that cluster most closely are Candia, Dumbarton, Grantham, and Mount Vernon. Hampton Falls, Plainfield, and Chesterfield are also on the list. And I was actually glad, sort of in a way, to see Plainfield and Grantham make it on this list, because I think that they are substantiated as pretty rational comparators, because they're here in the Upper Valley. So the next slide, and I kind of screwed up when I printed this out, so I'm just gonna check here. And I think, yeah, so skip the next slide on the
The
print,
graphs.
on the printout, and go to the slide that's labeled cost per pupil. So cost per pupil is a metric that DOE uses to compare costs across school district, and they calculate it.
Because I can't even figure out how to close
Hey,
this.
Hey, whoa. Wow, okay, I muted him, go ahead. I'm not gonna can't tell you who that was.
So that's calculated as the total operating expenses minus transportation costs, minus any revenue that the school gets for tuition, divided by the average daily membership and attendance, and that's your cost per pupil. And so the state average was $19,000, about $19,000 in fiscal year '22. And I often hear people say, oh wow, that we're so far above the state average. And again, I just wanna make the point that the comparator list, right, you watch that median start to like jump up, right? Because as that denominator gets smaller, right, it's just gonna skew things. So the median cost per pupil for the schools on our list was almost $22,000, so that's about $3,000 off where the state average is to begin with. We're at about, sorry, I didn't bring my glasses.
26,484.
Yeah, $26,000, so well above median, but certainly not the highest spending school on the list. And I think, you know, just to make the point, as you look at the cost per pupil and how it's changed over time, I plotted here since 2010 up to fiscal year 2022, and just sort of created this takeaway points list, where you see over the past 12 years, right, some schools on the list have been able to more tightly control their increase in cost. Our increase in cost, which is 78.5% over that 12-year span, is greater than the median. And then among this list of our peer schools, we do have the second highest cost per pupil in fiscal year '22. So our costs increase is not the highest. You'll see Bartlett, I managed to increase their costs by 100%. And I think there's another school on this list, Lincoln Ackerman. That's the school that had the 0.55% free reduced lunch.
Yeah, but you gotta
93%.
eliminate Bartlett and Lincoln because they're just totally dominated by the ski condo. And they're
They have, well, they have, right, and that's the point, right? I think that what you're seeing here in this, like the ability to control cost is in some way defined by how much people can afford to spend, right? And I just want to make that point. Although Grantham controlled costs better than we did, maybe, if you wanna look at it that way. So their cost per pupil in fiscal year '22 was $21,000, and they have a 63% increase over time. Plainfield is also lower than us at $24,000, approximately $24,000, with a 52% increase over time. But again, they were able to substantially reduce some costs by participating in some unique and creative cost-sharing measures that they started doing in, I think, 2019. Is that, I don't know what fiscal year it was, but it was before COVID.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but sharing SAU costs was a big incentive, and it has allowed them to also to begin to share other positions.
Right.
Some of their specials and, specialists that have to kind of do things,
So once you start forming that relationship, you have that ability to think about things differently, and you know people,
Well,
so
I
you're
think-
already talking to them.
The other big factor with those, I only speak to those districts because I know them so well, but the other big factor is that they're part of an area agreement and their tuition
Well-
rate is very, very controlled.
This is just, so that's another thing, so there's no high school cost in here.
Oh,
So
okay.
these cost per pupil costs are just that just that school that's operated.
Okay.
So the area, but you're right, their high school costs are lower, but it's not, that's not part of this calculation.
Good catch.
This is just another, so flip the slide, sorry, I'm forgetting that people have two ways of doing this. So this is just another view of cost per pupil grouped by fiscal year, and what you can see is that in fiscal year 2017, right, Lyme is the green dot, and that's kind of where you start to see Lyme starting to surpass the mean cost per pupil for these 17 schools on the list, so. So next slide, so NHSAS testing is a metric used by both DOE and the Lyme School to assess student performance. It's only one metric, there are more metrics, so this is just one. And I'm taking these 17 schools and now comparing the cost per pupil to the percent of students that score above or at proficiency in math and reading. And what you see on the list is that Lyme has very high scores. We've consistently performed above the median in math and proficiency for years. And that data, as what I can see, goes back to 2009. And we've always been kind of way above state average and way above the median for this list. So you see Lyme is 68% in math, 76% in reading. The median on this list is 51, 54. I think the state averages are even lower than those scores. And just if we're gonna take Grantham and Plainfield as comparators, I'll point out that Grantham has, in fiscal year 22, and this is just 1 year, it's much better to look at this data over time, but I can tell you that if you look at this data over time, you know, Grantham, Plainfield, Lyme, we stay pretty consistent over time with, these numbers are pretty honestly reflective of what has happened year to year. So Grantham has got 80% of their kids in math, 76 in reading, and Plainfield 62-59, right? With, you know, relatively good a relatively good distribution of cost per pupil, just for whatever it's worth.
You've often mentioned social capital. Which town would be similar to Lyme with social capital?
I think Grantham, very much so. I mean, when you look at household income, they're above $100,000. They have relatively few kids on free reduced lunch. Plainfield's the same. Hampton Falls looks a lot like Lyme. And when that has come up before, you know, I think that a lot of people would like to draw a sort of straight line between cost and curriculum at the school and these test scores. And I think that the school is very important. I think that there is a lot of value there. But I also think that our kids show up at the school door every day with I'm not alone in this, term social capital, right? My daughter has never known a life, she's sitting here on her computer right now, but she's not known a life without books, right? I've been reading to her since she was 3 months old, and I think a lot of us did that with our kids, right? So they show up and they're prepared and they're ready. So, you know.
You mentioned Hampton Falls, where is that?
It's
yeah,
right
okay,
below,
Tam-
right below
yeah,
Tamworth,
gotcha.
looks a lot like,
Yeah.
looks a lot like
Hampton
Lyme.
Falls is, I think, the
Whereas-
highest
yeah.
household income of any town in the state.
Yeah, and I'll show you like Tamworth, for example, at 24% kids above or at proficiency in reading are math and 50% in reading, which are pretty dismal scores. That was the town that had 50% of the kids on free reduced lunch. So now I'm gonna go like sort of back in the deck to this previous slide. You know, the really only correlation that you see between proficiency scores and another one metric is the proportion of kids eligible for free reduced lunch, and that's an inverse correlation. And that's not unique to New Hampshire, it's not unique to Lyme, it's not unique to the nation, you know, it's you see it across the nation. And that there's really no clear relationship between what you spend and, in this case, the percent of students eligible for free reduced lunch. And then on the next slide, you'll see that there's really no correlation, and these are just two variables, right? There's no correlation between the proficiency score and the amount of spending in the school, right? That sort of like socioeconomic overlay is important to take into account.
It's like our healthcare.
Hmm?
It's like US healthcare.
Yeah. So on the next slide, what I did was show the relationship between cost per pupil and the capacity to raise funds, and that's where you do see a relationship. So on the left graph is plotted with Bartlett, that little dot way out at above $6 million equalized value per pupil, which is the x-axis. So it makes things hard to look at. So I took it out and replotted it on the right, and you can see that there is a correlation between cost per pupil and equalized value per pupil, right? And that's not usually surprising. This is why DOE uses it as a metric to assess the town's ability to raise funds. If you can raise them, you might, and if you can't raise them, you can't raise them. And you see that pretty clearly here. So I did kind of shade that peachy orange box. I'm not sure how it shows up on your slide as sort of the towns that Lyme looks like, right, in terms of that equalized value per pupil, and then the table below will tell you what those 4 dots are. And you can see that Lyme spent significantly more per pupil than the other schools that group like Lyme. as similar in equalized value per pupil. You can also see that the median household incomes are, ranging now from $50,000 up to Lyme at $112,000. And to be fair, that New Hampshire does not collect good income data, and they don't present income data. They have the data, they just don't do anything with it. That's, I think, a 2019 number. So that number is, all of these numbers are probably elevated today relative to where they were even just 3 years ago.
Well, Census Bureau doesn't, survey.
That's where this data comes from. But it came out in the legislature that DRA actually gets income data from the IRS every year, and they don't have anybody to do anything with it, so it just sort of sits, so they could do it. So that brought the finance committee, right, to our question, right, which is specifically, are there informative differences in school operation that can explain why schools can teach children with similar economic backgrounds spend different amounts of money and achieve similar results, right? And here, I just want to, again, make it clear that there's an enormous caveat, right? We're only tracking one metric, right, to use to define results, but we don't have another one. And, when we've had these conversations with the school administration, they use the same metric, right, which is these test scores, to say yeah, we're doing a good job because our kids are doing well. They're performing well on these tests. So, just a few thoughts kind of came to mind for us, which is that, right, the educational status of parents can impact those results. Some districts may be able to spend less and provide fewer resources in the school, and parents can make up the difference at home so the kids still perform well on the tests. Some districts, like I said, may be under more fiscal pressure to contain costs. Parents and homeowners in some districts may apply pressure to a school to grow and provide more programming and curricular resources, and those pressures may not occur evenly across towns. And then SPED needs are important to consider and very difficult to disaggregate in data sets, in particular in these small towns, because often the numbers are shielded from public view for legal reasons. But I want to make the point that SPED is very expensive to deliver, and that's something that can differ across districts that could impact this differential cost per pupil.
And just for clarity, SPED is special education.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So another metric we could use, that we thought to use, is to compare cost across districts looking at staffing levels. And so we put together some data relevant to school staff, which I'm going to try to go through very quickly. So using data on DOE's website, we can track non-administrative school staff numbers back to fiscal year 2017. And what you see in fiscal year 22 is that Lyme had an above median staff per student ratio at 0.222. So essentially that's just the total non-administrative staff members, the full-time equivalent for anybody in the room who knows what that means, you might care, just divided by the ADM. So we're at 0.222, so Grantham, which is operating their school at about $21,000 per kid, is at 0.187, and then Plainfield is at 0.171, right? So we have a elevated level of staff relative to, those two comparator schools and to the median on the list. That's myself here. So this chart, the next chart just breaks down sort of within that total number what people do. Who are the teachers, instructional support, librarians, specialists, admin, and then all other support. And so I just put that here in case people wanted to know. And then this chart also pulls the fiscal year 22 cost per pupil forward. So I think one of the reasons why our school is,
Could you provide some context or justification why the numbers are varied between Grantham, Lyme, and Plainfield?
We just have different staff numbers. I mean, we would have to look, and I haven't done that. One thing I can say off the top of my head is Grantham and Plainfield don't offer foreign language. Grantham doesn't have it at all, and Plainfield doesn't have it in the lower school, but Lyme's able to offer it across all grade levels. I think we have a 1.0 guidance counselor, I'm not sure if that's the case for Plainfield and Grantham. They're just, you know, and I guess to make the point, I don't know, but I think that's a good question to ask and to sort of, you know, make those comparators. If we want our budget to come down, or if we see, you know, I think what the finance committee sees is that the trajectory in growth and the predicted growth over time doesn't feel sustainable. So we wanna understand, like, basically what changes could we make and not impact the outcomes, right? And so that's the primary question, so we could ask. But I haven't, I just know those couple of things. And those have come out in conversation at board meetings relatively recently over the past few weeks.
I thought you made the comment earlier that the cost dropped for those two school districts that were sharing administrative costs.
Plainfield and Cornish. Cornish isn't on this
And
list.
Grantham or not? Grantham is a single like us?
Grantham is a single SAU.
Okay.
Yes, Grantham is a single SAU.
But these are non-administrative school staff members, so this is not including the admin.
It doesn't include the admin.
But your graph does include it does include admin.
The cost per pupil
Well, the one that
includes,
divides it down by group of who is, the count for each of the groups.
there's no, in this, there's not, they're all non-administrative staff members, so the administration isn't included in these numbers. So you have to go somewhere else
on
at,
this page.
yeah, you have to go somewhere else at DOE to find those numbers, they're not as easy to put together.
In other words, the SAU costs aren't in
They're-
the cost per student.
You
The
have a
SAU
column
costs
with,
are in the cost per pupil, because that's total expenditures. The
We're just
administrative, the number of administrators aren't included in the chart on slides 13 and 14. Those are just non-administrative staff members.
But it says admin support and it has a count. It's in your chart.
Oh, admin support, that would be the business office. Admin, like, what's admin support? People who
Secretary?
support the administration, who can be, I'm thinking Kristen
assistants.
Clark would be
Yeah,
admin support,
Admin assistants.
yeah. So it's, yeah, that's just personnel that supports the administrators. The administrators are superintendent, principal, the student services director, who's sometimes called the special education services director. And then we have an academic director at our school. Not every school has that, and that's also an administrative position.
So admin support, for example, you have 1.5. What position would that be?
I think it's Janet plus a 0.5.
I bet it's Amanda and Kristen, so it's the secretary of the school,
But that's not 1.5.
it is. Cause Kristen's a 0.6,
Oh, right, okay,
so Amanda's a 1.0,
yeah,
so I'm sure it's those two people,
got it. So are you an administrator?
yeah.
Okay. So, and then Kristen helps organize the business office and post, I mean, I can't even list the number of things that she does. And then Amanda essentially, I guess, functions as like the secretary in the school.
I didn't want to get too far into what isn't our job, but I was trying to understand the numbers. So
Mhm.
if you had a shared administrative district, some of the things that are in your admin support would be divided potentially among more than one school district.
Potentially. Yeah, it would be up to how it would be up to how you, I mean, I can tell you from the point of view of Plainfield and Cornish, and Frank can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially, they have a 1.0 superintendent that dedicates half of her time to Cornish and half of her time, or his time, I should say, because I'm not sure, to Plainfield. And then they have some other shared costs. Are they sharing the support costs as well?
They're moving in that direction, yes, sharing some of those things.
Right.
It may, from a total dollars point of view, your classification may make no difference, but they aren't technically in front of the students.
The administrative support personnel, no, they're not teaching in any capacity.
Right, so if we wanna talk about those things that are student-facing every day,
Yeah,
then that column probably should be removed from the analysis, because those don't.
Yeah, everybody else everybody else on this list faces students,
Right.
except for the admin support column.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a suggestion, or actually a question, really.
Yeah,
And you're also saying that the curriculum coordinator is not included.
no, because she's an administrator, or he, whoever would function in that position would be an administrator. So when we look at the cost per pupil, one of the things that, that we believe is really represented in that higher cost in Lyme is that we have the highest average teacher salary among the school cohort list. And I think in fiscal year 22, we were 16th highest in the state, right? So we staff more personnel per student, and we also pay our teachers significantly more than the median, which here is about $65,000, which no one on the finance committee argues against. And the reason why we don't argue against it in part is in the next slide, where we see also that we have two metrics that we can follow: educational attainment of teachers and teacher experience, that also correlate, right, with those salaries. So we have the highest percentage of staff teachers that have earned a master's degree, and then we also have the highest percentage of teachers that are experienced educators as defined by DOE, right? So that is a teacher who has taught for 3 years and been rated as effective. And so what I think you're looking at there is our ability to attract highly qualified teachers and our ability to retain them, right? And those are two, I think, incredibly important things that, substantiate, in my mind, like that cost, right? If you want to refer to it as a cost. But I put it here because it is one variable that is contributing to the fact that our cost per pupil is higher than a lot of our peer schools. So, yep.
To what extent does that reflect, that having that higher pay scale lends itself to our ability to retain them? Versus, I think what's more likely and what I've observed here, which is that people choose to stay, right? Our teachers stay here, and as a result, are higher on that pay scale here, right?
Yeah,
so it's not necessarily, as far as like looking at those numbers, I mean, you would need to make that analysis, you need to look at the pay scale and compare the pay scale, not what we're actually paying people, but what our pay scale is, and compare pay scales to other districts, right? Because looking at our median pay is more a reflection of the fact that, like, great teachers have chose to stay here.
And right, and so we're a little, maybe we're a little top heavy, so to speak, because our teachers are further along, I'll use step and track for that term. Yeah, I think that's true. So they go hand in hand, right? But we are still retaining teachers, right? And we have those teachers that have many, many years of experience in front of students, and they're gonna be, in my mind, like the most capable to address problems, right? Because they've seen them before. I mean, I think that there's real value in that, personally. And I think the committee agrees with me.
In a lot of ways, it's a very positive indicator, right? People have stayed, they want to teach here, right?
Yeah. So, however, at the same time, I was on the budget committee for 3 years before I joined the school board. I'm on my second year on the school board, and have heard for years, really people saying, like, I don't understand, why does this school cost so much? We can't afford it. Experienced people like moving out of town. I mean, this is just sort of something that we hear a lot, and I think even on this committee, and on the school board over the past few years, there's been a real sort of desire to ask these questions and potentially impart some change to, control the trajectory of growth and make it, sort of more sustainable. And so I put this slide together to show that over time, about 90% of the cost to operate the school is represented as salaries and benefits, right? And so in our mind, if we're gonna introduce some type of sustainable cap on budget growth or decrease the budget in a meaningful way, we should at least be evaluating this, and I think that there's been a real sort of level of discomfort with saying that out loud, and putting that, forward and in front of people, right? And so the second bullet point, right, we believe that it's true because you've got 90% of the cost sort of occupied in that part of the histogram. And I just also want to make the point for myself and on behalf of the committee that this is not because we don't value, right, staff at the school and we don't value the programming, and we think that these positions, you know, we don't say that anything doesn't have inherent value, right, for educating our kids, but we do question whether the value is substantiated by the cost, and we just want to analyze it.
I was just wondering, as you're thinking about the analysis, how does the strategic plan that needs to be, I guess, a new strategic plan, how does that factor into thinking about budget and a thoughtful plan going forward?
I think that's one reason why we were so eager to kind of do this year, was because we know that we're going to do a new strategic plan, or we're gonna be formulating a new strategic plan next year. And that strategic plan should start essentially in the academic calendar year 24, which is fiscal year 25 for the school. And so it gives us, like, to start doing these like analyses like now and this year gives us a good opportunity to kind of go into that process really as thoughtfully, right, as we can. But I think it's a good point. Then let's see. I think a lot of people already know this, so I'm gonna skip this slide and just say that if you just flip to the last slide, I don't wanna, you know, I think I've been frustrated, and I have even said at the budget committee several times, like, why are we always picking on the K-8 school? There's lots of other costs here to consider, right? And so I wanted to give those other potential costs some, a chance to be considered and spoken about on this slide, and one I've already sort of alluded to, right? Our committee is accepting the fact essentially that we operate as an SAU of one school, right? And we know that's driving some of our costs, because larger SAUs are able to share costs. And we have discussed the possibility of sharing costs with neighboring districts. I mean, most recently, our principal said that he didn't really feel that sharing costs with neighboring districts was feasible for our school. That there was a feeling, or the opinion, or the understanding that was expressed was that the school that we would want to share resources with would be Hanover. Hanover is maybe not interested in sharing resources with us. And then another point was made that there's pretty big distances, right, between Lyme and other schools, and would it be feasible even to share some of these costs, because you have to pay for people's transportation.
So, quick piece of information on that topic. I had a conversation with the superintendent of Hanover this afternoon, Dr. Adams, and he made a point of correcting that we've had conversations in Lyme that they may not be interested, and he said that's not necessarily true. And that once both districts have settled our budgets and all of that, he would approach their board about potentially having a committee meeting together to talk about how that might happen. But
Which I think would be great, and it's not hugely surprising, because I think even Hanover is hitting a point where they're starting to experience some real budget sensitivity, whether it's occurring within the town of Hanover or within the town of Norwich, right? That they're having to make some, they're starting to have to make some choices, right, as they're going, as they go forward. So I think that's awesome. So there's some real potential there. Much like Plainfield and Cornish, right, they started sharing, and then every year, it's like, once you start that conversation, you get more and more opportunities when you open a door, I think, than when you don't. And I would be like totally neglectful if I did not point out that we do, as a committee, understand that the tuition rate at Hanover is the highest in the Upper Valley, and we do think that we could consider the impact of modifying high school choice policy, but we don't believe there would be support to remove Hanover High School from the list of sending schools, and then to make the point that the finance committee wouldn't support that effort either. So I guess the overarching point is, when you look at the total expenditures in our district, if we want to try to control costs, like, where else are we going to control costs? We don't really have a lot of control over them at the high school level. We can try to share costs as an SAU, right, with other districts, which I think would be a really good idea. But it's the K-8 school that we have the ability to manipulate the budget of. So for better or for worse, I'm a person who sat at the table many times and said, this isn't fair, why are we picking on the K-8 school? And I feel like I've schooled myself a bit, and I understand systemically what's happening here a little bit more. So, yep, that's it for me. So really just want to give that context to, I think, why the committee applied the pressure that it applied to the school this year, in a way that hasn't been done in the past.
All right, I'm gonna say that I originally hoped we'd be through with this in less than half an hour, but I noticed it's 45 minutes. So we are running a little behind schedule, in my mind. Is there any final questions so that we don't have to? I know most people did not get a chance to really review this since they weren't available until about 3 o'clock this afternoon. So,
I just have one comment. I mean, thank you so much for putting this together. I think it's really helpful.
Thank you.
And, yeah, to see this cost of people and all these numbers. But one thought I had was that, there are no real apples to apples after all. All these communities are different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially, we don't have insight onto what, maybe we have the ability to have insight onto, say, what Plainfield or Grantham spends on their special education. But that could be a big factor in a small school, right? It could be a really big factor.
Really drive that.
That's what I'm saying. So I guess, overall, we can look at these other towns that are similar to us, but we can't really say we shouldn't be spending this much more than Plainfield or this much more than Grantham unless we really know the ins and outs of all of what's going on in those schools. So I do really appreciate the comparison because I think it's helpful. But I don't think it's something that should drive our decisions.
Yeah, the only thing I would push back on is to look at, when you look at the cost over time, right? And you can sort of make these comparisons in 10-year bins and those costs, at least theoretically, and you can go in, DOE does provide some data on the percent of students in a district, as long as it's above 10%. You'll get the percent of students that are on IEPs, for example, which is an individualized education plan, which is something that that's offered to kids who are in the special education program, but it doesn't delineate that, because even within that bin, some kids are going to be much more expensive than other kids, and yeah, so that you won't know. So for that type of thing, and that's why I think it is important to look at things in 5 and 10-year bins, which I did present mostly fiscal year 22 data to make it digestible, right?
No, I appreciate everything. I just wanna, make that point that is our intention to be more like Plainfield or to be more like Grantham? I don't think so, but I do think that these are very helpful numbers to look at.
Thank you.
All right. What we have to do tonight is we have to make, and they're not going to be what would be the budget committee's final recommendation, because I think we have an issue with most of the information people have, they just received today, or this afternoon actually. But what we do have to decide today is basically what we're gonna send to the public hearing, which is next week. And the reason why we've gotten into a time crunch on this is getting the town report printed in time basically cost us a week on what was our original schedule, was the printer. So we really have to compress what's left, which means we have to have a public hearing next week, which means tonight we have to reach a sort of a decision of at at least the starting point for the public hearing on what the numbers will be for all the warrant articles. And I would caution people that as a budget committee, we're recommending the total number. We're not saying whether schools should cut special education or whether they should cut high school tuition, or whether they should cut building maintenance. We're voting on the total operating budget. Now, if we make a change to what they've proposed in what we got today, out of a courtesy, we should identify where we think the change should occur, rather than, or we can cop out, and just throw it back at the school when we finally vote the final number to make the adjustments. But I think it would be just a courtesy to identify where we think things should change from the numbers that they have given us. Does everybody understand where I'm coming from?
You wanna
Does
take a
public
vote on
We'll have
that?
to do in 2 hours, so.
You wanna take a vote on that? Do you wanna take a vote on that motion?
I'm not making it as a motion.
Do you wanna get a sense of the meeting on that?
All right, a sense of a meeting, do people as a sense of a meeting agree that what we should do today is at least reach an agreement on where we should start at the public hearing? That's what I'm
Where
proposing.
start, you mean a gross number?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Yes.
agree.
all right.
I'm just wondering if you had a comma, should we give them an indication where we think they should reduce costs? That's what I'm asking you to get a sense of the meeting.
All right, if we change their proposal,
Yep.
I think we should give them some guidance as to where we think the reduction should come or the increases should come, because we could agree that we think they cut too deeply in some area. I think we both have a moral responsibility to give them some guidance that way.
I think maybe in talking about the numbers, we might wanna give our individual opinions about it, but I don't think as a committee, we could really effectively suggest where cuts are, because I think we're a very diverse group in that.
I agree with James, we give them a number, that's their side, this is our side, let them do it.
People wanna just concentrate on the gross number?
Well, the school board exists outside of us. I mean, some of us may be on the school board, but that's their job, is to come up with a budget. And we can decide if it's too expensive or not, but I don't feel equipped, since I don't go to the school board meetings, I don't sit on their finance committee. I personally would be a little reluctant, I might have an opinion, but I'm not sure that it's relevant in a public context.
I think people agree with you, it's not up to us to do their job.
All right,
I have a question though, if I might. We had a 7.5 presentation. This one is 4.5 or 4.6. My question was, and I appreciate there was a lot of hard work, there was a lot of discussion, there was disagreement. Yes, 4.35 from 7.52. As the superintendent, knowing you've been here for a little bit, and certainly you have a lot of experience, between those two numbers, is there a number that you personally, if you had a magic wand, never mind individual cuts, would there be a number where you think the school would benefit most at some reduced rate below the 8+% that was originally, but maybe not as low as the 4.35?
the 5.2.
So I was gonna ask a clarifying point, is that 4.3 with $100,000 from the trust fund in it, or is that?
Yeah, that's,
I don't know, if I can answer.
all right, I think
haven't
this
looked
may
at it
help.
closely yet.
Excuse me a minute on this. I prepared a sheet here, which is just the numbers, because when we look at Janet's spreadsheet, it's very easy to get lost in the trees in the forest rather than just looking at the sort of summary lines. Now, I've got about 15 copies here, And basically what this does is it basically takes the budget that we got last week with what the percent changes were from the previous year, and the budgets we got this afternoon with the percent changes, and then it's got a column that has what the changes, the dollar changes were between the two of them. And if people are concerned of how we went from 8.2 to 5 point something,
4.3.
No, 4.35.
4.35, these sheets will show it, so let's pass some of those around before we decide what kind of a number we're gonna send to the public hearing. Why don't you give these some to the audience back there?
So Fraser, can I ask that question, is there in the high school tuition line, is there a $100,000 deficit
Okay.
relative to expected?
I think you've had a chance to look at my sheet, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, right.
But let me, okay, so, one of the directives from the school budget finance committee was that as we, are able to refine our budget, that we refine our budget. So we, right up until a half hour before we came over, we have been making changes in the documents that you have. So the documents that you have aren't 100% because we've gotten corrected tuition numbers from most of the schools in Vermont, I think all of them. And I mentioned I had a conversation with Dr. Badams. I was able to coerce him into giving me, not finalized, but what they believe are pretty close numbers for Hanover tuition. So I have a sheet, which the very last line gives you where we actually are, which is a little bit different from what was just passed out, and I'll pass those around, see if you all.
And can you just say what
Paper,
Tell
that?
us what it says.
I just found it.
Say more and speak less.
Okay, and so what, the real summary, other than those adjustments that we're having to make, is that our budget when we walked out of here was $8,541,777, and that's on Dick's sheet.
Yep.
When we got to the school board passed a motion to reduce the budget by $241,073 with recommendations in two categories. And then they passed a second resolution to access or reduce high school tuition by $100,000 and access the trust fund. So, our step one, we decreased high school tuition by the $100,000 to create that deficit to access the trust fund. That left $141,073 still to find in the recommended lines, following their guidance. And so you see that 0.5 came out of, I had written down those codes, but I
Tech.
think.
Tech and library,
Pardon me?
tech and library.
Tech and library lines.
Those were the big ones.
Right, and then the remainder has to come out of the administrative line. So when all those adjustments get made in the end, and then we added back in the changes in tuition that we are aware of to get as close as we can to meeting what we are directed to do by the school board, and what we know are the fairly accurate changes. And that brings us to that bottom line of $8,354,266. And that is a 5.16 increase. Now, I wanna go back to Judy's question. Okay, but I wanted you to have the right numbers.
Thank you.
And I wanted you, where we are right at the moment and where that came from. So the question is there something in between? And the real answer is, that's a community decision. I can look at your school and I can make recommendations about what I think, where you may look, or if you wanted to reduce, or if you wanted to add, or where I think there may be needs. And I'm getting kind of a sense, I've been here just about exactly a year. And one of the things we were asked to do in that process was to develop a list of potential places that we would look to give as a tool, to give to the finance committee, which they use to then recommend to the board on cuts. And I can give you that, and it has all of the codes if you wanted to look what lines it would come from, and I have that here. Much faster, okay. So in the end, my recommendation to the board was that if we simply do not replace the retiring person, that's $107,000. And if we have $100,000 out of the trust, we don't have to look for very much more money. And we can look at positions like the SAU assistant, which we don't currently have. We don't have to necessarily add that next year. We can look at places where there are funding in custodial services. If we are lucky enough to hire our own and not have to do contracted services, we can find that other money. So that would leave all of our current people whole that are in place without affecting any further cuts. I have to remind you that as a community, Jen has given you really good data tonight, and you have chosen to have more art education perhaps, to have more Spanish in your school, to have an academic director, to do a lot of things that other schools don't do, because as a community you feel it's important for your community and your school and to do, and it adds an extra service. Is it beyond what the basics are that you would have to provide? Yeah, it is. But communities decide what they want to offer children in our system in New Hampshire based on what they feel they can honestly ask their taxpayers to pay. So I think it's been a community choice to add those things. The school board always has to be able to evaluate and make good decisions about are they the right things or not, and I think we'll do that. John has been pretty clear that he feels that the school is running well right now, and he can certainly speak for himself about that. But to answer your question, Judy, that's where I would. That's the simplest places to go.
Thank you very much.
What's the number?
Yeah, do you have a number?
83,54,266.
No.
That's the
No.
number.
That's the number.
That's the number I brought you.
Right, but what would be the number if it, first of all, one initial question is, who is what's the retiring position? Who's retiring?
Steve Daniel.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, if you didn't do that and, you didn't hire the assistant and you were able to hire a custodian, does that number come out to the same as these other ones, or is that a different number than?
It depends on how you want to pick and choose. I mean, really, that becomes where does the board, how much money do in the end do they really want to spend?
But is that the number at the bottom of your list there?
No.
No, that number could change, and you can change that. That number reflects exactly what I said. It reflects $100,000 coming out of the trust, which is a decision. And it reflects the $141,073 coming out of the lines that are identified.
So
Right,
if we,
but I
excuse
think-
me, a sec, just a second. If we took out the trust fund money to get that $100,000, and you didn't, hire, and you didn't replace the retiring position, there's, 200 right there. 207,000.
Right.
This number already integrates that, like, sort of $100,000, so basically what you're looking at
I'm
then.
not worried about that number.
Where-
I wanna
where's
know what the
100
total savings is.
Yeah, like, where's 141 gonna come from?
Right.
And
I'm not
those-
interested actually in that $241,000 number, actually. Yeah, I am interested in it, but
Mhm.
I think personally, I think based on what I'm hearing in this information, that it's too much. That we're cheating the K-8 school by going after those positions. So I would like to hear what.
Yeah, so if you go back to where we were at the 7.52, and if you're at that point, and then you do not fill the retiring position of 107, you're gonna reduce that by 1.5% roughly, and where does that bring us down to?
6%.
6.
It looks like you're at 8.4.
Then another 100 with the trust.
Yeah,
And then I'm gonna trust, so
Yeah.
we're looking at
Yeah.
It's like 8.4 million.
So it'd be
8.3.
727 would be the
So
figure,
the two things,
with the 100,000,
The trust?
107.
and the non-replacing one person,
That's 207,
right there.
that's a 6%.
and that puts the budget at 6%, and what was the total that you got with just those two coming out?
So 100 down in the trust, then 107,727 by not replacing the retirement position. And then if you mentioned the assistant, that's 40,190.
You're at 8.4 million.
So I have a question.
Yes.
When this
Yeah,
finance
let me-
committee of the school board voted for that 100,000 to come out, was that a unanimous vote?
No.
No,
I don't think it was.
Okay, so
No,
do we have
split.
that?
let me add something to it. We can have this conversation about positions and all that. In the end, there will be a certain amount of money that the town approves, and it's a bottom line budget, and all these conversations, in the end, they're interesting, they bring flavor, and they bring information to the school board, but in the end, the school board will make the final decisions about what positions
so-
and all of that kind of
My-
thing.
my
That's how
point-
it works.
wait,
Let me just say something before we open it up again, in furtherance of what you said. I think we have to, before we can say it should be A or B, we have to know whether it's reasonable to get there or not.
Yeah.
And part of the knowing whether it's reasonable to get there or not is some idea of what things might be cut or might be added. And I think you've provided that. Now I think when we're discussing of whether it's $10,000 worth of lawyer services to negotiate a contract with teachers union, I don't think that's any of our business. I think what you've shown us is that if we go with this number, these are the type of things that would have to be cut or implemented. And it's up to us to decide whether those are reasonable or not. If we decide to propose a budget of $8,344,000, or whether we think it should be $8,400,000. But I think that's the kind of judgment the budget committee has to have, and we have to know whether a certain degree of cutting is reasonable or not.
So my question was, is it actually wise to take $100,000 out of the trust fund when we're looking at a fifth grade class that is normal, or larger than normal, and is gonna be hitting high school in 4 years? I mean,
Yeah.
what are the implications of taking that money out now, opposed to leaving it in the trust fund?
I can give some context to how that $100,000 out of the trust fund came to be. So a motion had been made during the board meeting to reduce the budget by $241,073. And that vote was 4-3, even the chair voted in favor of removing that money. I voted yes to remove the money, in part because otherwise nothing's ever gonna change if we don't make something happen. But I did feel that $241,000 would be hard for the school to manage that much loss of money. And so that's when I voted yes, knowing that I was gonna make a motion to take the $100,000 from the trust fund to compensate for what I felt was an aggressive bottom line cut in this year with a week's notice, right? I felt that was difficult. So that's, and the $100,000, how did we vote on that? Did we vote all yes on the 100? Yeah, so we did all vote unanimously to take that money out of the trust fund.
I think so.
4-3, no, it was 4-3.
No, the
That
4.3,
4.3
it couldn't have
was
been,
not it.
4.3 was the
I believe
reduction
I
in the
didn't-
budget.
It was.
And Yola, did you even vote on the
I
trust
don't think I
fund?
did
Because
vote.
it wasn't that close, so you wouldn't have voted. So we only probably had 6 votes.
All right, I'm
It was
gonna,
either 5-1 or 4-2.
yeah, I'd like to move a little bit here. What the object of this meeting is to come up with a number that will go to the public hearing. And I think what we can do is if we come up with a number to go to the public hearing, that will give the school administration, school board, everybody a chance what number that will have. And they can bring up at the public hearing whether that's reasonable, whether they need more, whether they can cut further. But we can make adjustments at the public hearing, and in that spirit, I would like to propose that we use a number of $8,400,000 to the public hearing.
I will second that.
And that be the number we post, going to the public hearing, to give the school board something reasonable to work with, that we can then have the public hearing on to discuss the implications of that budget. And then we can make a final adjustment as to what the budget committee will recommend as a result of the public hearing.
I believe that's 6%.
Yeah, about that, yeah. So from the budget committee, I'll do it, does somebody have a comment on the 1.4 million?
8.4.
Yeah, I'd like to have 1.4 would be nice, but anyway, yes.
We have a motion and a second.
Yes.
Yeah,
My question is, what's your rationale for 8.4
Okay, wait, who
million?
made a motion and who seconded it?
Dick made the motion,
I
Judy
seconded
seconded it.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were just talking, I didn't realize you were. I'm paying attention. All right, so
What's your
Dick.
rationale for that, 8.4?
He just gave it.
Is it, sorry, I missed it.
For negotiations.
it's a starting point that the school board and the school administration can come and give us next week a spreadsheet basically that shows how you'll get to 8.4, and then we can discuss that at the public hearing.
I don't understand, why does 8.4 differ from the 8.29 that came tonight on all this handouts we
Because
got?
I got a note in the discussion earlier that you brought up, we're rating the trust fund to get down there when we've got a big classes coming down the future, and it may not be too smart to take all the cut out of the trust fund.
Okay, that's what I thought, I
Yeah.
just wanted it stated.
But you're not modifying, we've already made that motion, you're not like, by increasing the budget to 8.4 million, you've done nothing about that $100,000.
We're not gonna argue whether it's gonna
Okay.
be out of administration costs, or school salaries, or Steve Denko's retirement, or where it comes from. We're just saying that
Here's a number.
this is a number to work with, and you may not have to take 100,000 out of the trust fund, and I think you've got, at least some of us feel you're taking too much and you're taking 100,000 out of the trust fund. But that's just the kind of guidance that I was trying to hint at.
But what if you increase it in the school board, we try to make a motion to reduce, right, that amount coming out of high school trust?
It's our committee,
And the
let us
school board's
vote.
like, no, we'll take that and we'll keep the 100 too.
Then you have.
That's school board's authority, how much they take out of it, because the school board is the agents for that trust, not the
Okay.
budget committee or the school district meeting.
Let's vote.
Let's vote. Budget committee, those in favor of 8.4, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm a no.
3 noes. Any abstain?
Did you get the 3? Bill Malcolm and John
Yes.
and
Thank you.
Jen. And then they have warrant articles.
Now, I did that as Article 2 was the starting point. Article 3 on the school district is the building maintenance projects at 50,000. And I think it was briefly discussed at the last meeting. And how do people feel about,
For these floors,
moving that forward to the public hearing?
that's for this
Asbestos one?
engineering to
What?
study it.
Is it the asbestos floor removal?
No, it's for a firm to come in and assess the state of the building,
Oh, right.
right? And give us a, like,
basically-
realistic estimate on what, like, a holistic
Yeah,
approach
I
to
remember.
making the repairs would be.
And to prioritize them and cost estimates for them. You can get some cost estimates on that kind of thing.
That's, I hope so. That's what I'm hoping is true.
Yeah. Do I hear any further comments from the budget committee on whether the 50K should go to the public hearing?
I move it to the public hearing.
Second.
Judy and Bill?
Thank you, Bill.
And I have a question.
Yes?
There was some, is this for the asbestos?
No.
Oh, that's the next one.
It's not for the actual asbestos, it's for the
No.
studying of how to do it and prioritizing it.
Is to give us a really good idea of how big the problem is, what the educational building needs are, so that we can have a rational plan then going forward.
Okay,
It's the engineering design if you want something.
so is this postponing any actual
Correct.
improvement for another year?
They have some money in the regular budget for building maintenance, which would be for emergency items. They also have a trust fund that they can withdraw, which has a little bit of money in it, for which would be emergency repairs.
Correct.
But this does not deal with emergency repairs. And the other thing about asbestos is as long as it's encapsulated, it's not a hazard.
Right, okay,
It's when it gets airborne that it becomes a hazard.
okay.
And part of this engineering study is there airborne asbestos that we really have to worry about? Are we ready to vote on 50K for Article 3, going forward to the public hearing? Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
I abstain. Can't make up my mind.
As good as Reed is,
Can you do
Yes,
just pass?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna
They
keep
do.
I'm keeping my pass card in my pocket.
They do it in Congress all the time.
All right, Article 4 is the transfer of surplus to the Maintenance Capital Reserve Fund. Hopefully, if there's any money, this will get us started on some of the actual repairs out of that trust fund. And it's to up to $100,000. I don't think you're gonna get $100,000 surplus this year.
Probably not.
No, to give it context, last year, I think it was about $43,000, and since we created that deficit in the high school line, we're likely not, we may not even get to 43 this year. It could be kind of, which always makes Janet's life very stressful in June, as she wonders, like, will we make payroll? And we all just start rolling dice.
I would move Article 4 to go to public hearing.
I'll second it.
Wilks, second.
Yes.
All those in favor, ayes?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the last one is the easiest. Oh, I don't think we vote on the transit sale, because that's a revenue one, I don't think that's under our purview. But Article 8 is a money appropriation, which is the school board salaries,
Article 6.
or Article 6, I'm sorry. Maybe I should, yeah. Do I hear going forward, what, the total is what, 825?
No, well, total, well, the treasurer is 825, 1025 in total with those other
10,
two.
yeah, 10.
salaries.
1025.
I'll move it.
It's part of the regular budget line items, by the way.
It's included in
It's
the regular
included in
budget,
Article
but
2, yeah.
I think to make it safe, we probably should have a recommend, not recommend on this item. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we got to the public hearing with the school. All right, now, next week when we get there, we will be soliciting comments from the audience, number one. And number two, I will hope that all the members of the budget committee would have had more of a chance to review the spreadsheets that are close to where we are than what we had with getting the spreadsheets at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Do our best.
Thank you very much.
So I know that Janet had a very stressful week.
Yeah.
And thank you all, the rest of you, for coming out, we appreciate that. Please come next week, you'll have a great opportunity to speak.
What's fun is today?
What time, Mr. Dano? The school just absorbed that, that's okay.
Yeah,
Pretty big.
we're still doing the town budget.
Now we're going on to the town
Town budget.
Nobody wants to
Okay.
hear about the
I
town
mean,
budget.
if that's
Well,
what
I
we're
know
doing.
most of the people that
school
were here
is-
for the school, so I was wanted to do that first.
And they're okay? and-
Well, as long as the town doesn't feel like that.
Well, I think
We
we
will
should
get-
do the town first, so people stay and listen.
Result.
Well, the thing you have to remember though is the school is 2/3 of our expenditures. It should be 2/3 of our costs.
Hearing your thinking.
Whatever. it is.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Do you have,
Which is
do
just
you have a
another
draft warrant
tax
somewhere?
really by
That's all our time.
Yeah.
Do it.
We might get big money for this van, maybe if we put in like a little kitchenette in it or something.
Right?
So we can go.
Mattresses.
Alright, I parked some in.
You don't need to see all the words.
Can we have it as a draft warrant for next week's meeting? There are a couple of issues here.
Viola,
Thank you.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to
Thank you,
have
school,
here.
for trying to put up with us for
Oh,
one more week of it, I guess.
great, it's all
Bye-bye.
gonna be
Good
good.
learning for me.
Every town's different.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Good night. Good night. So the town budget is, should be very familiar to what you've seen. Dina went through and updated the spent as of 12/31, that's page 10 of the handout. Thank you, Bill. Of the budget committee review. And we have an estimated final balance this year, being able to take some items out of what was quote unquote left, of $89,837.98. Our budget is still at our proposed budget for next year is still at 2.93%.
Oh,
Page 10?
yep. And you're asking for 275,997?
Correct.
Now, what are the changes from what was presented back in November? You know?
In the regular
It's-
budget,
In the
nothing?
regular budget is,
It's the same.
I think it's pretty much the same, that 2.93 has been around for quite a while. Then,
Well, let's do it one article at a time, Judy, please.
yes, sir.
We're going to the public hearing, and for some of us, this is the first time we will have seen what follows this particular item, so it's kind of hard to, or
Okay,
close to the first
So
time.
I believe it's warrant article 3, which is the operating budget.
All right, now, this would be going to the public hearing, 2.759997. Do I hear a motion to?
So moved. Second.
Bill and Wilkes.
and Wilkes. Thank you.
And any questions on it at this point? Those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous, I guess. All right, the next is the 2 capital reserve funds.
Right.
And that is,
We are proposing to the capital reserve funds.
I have a spreadsheet here with a total of 410, and I have the summary sheet at 390.
Okay, this 410 was last
No, you
year.
have the wrong spreadsheet.
That's, this is the.
Or look on the far
300
right column, Dick.
Oh,
That's what you want.
That's what
all
you
right.
want. 390,000 is the total amount,
That shows you how well I studied it.
and I can go down each one if you wish, but, you can also track them. The bridge capital reserve, do you need me to go down each one or not?
Sure. Do people wanna go down them all, or just
You've all got,
look at,
you've
vote
got a
this
sheet.
total of 390?
390, so we're
Whatever.
I see
saving
it,
20,
I just found the right sheet.
okay.
I can see what you're
Sorry.
saying, you want me to go
Yeah.
down?
Did anybody find it? Yes.
All right, do I have a motion to send the 390K to the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
All right, and all those in favor, any questions? Those in favor? Any opposed?
Okay.
I hope you get who moves in second, I'm not gonna try to.
Gotcha,
trouble.
right here.
All right, the next item coming up here is the New Hampshire
Okay.
block grant at 95K. That's basically an in and out, we're accepting the
Okay.
money and then we're authorizing it to spend it.
Yep,
Is that,
that's it.
they've told us what it is?
No, we don't know exactly what it is, we won't know that until
Town meeting.
next, after town meeting, actually.
Is 95 gonna
just-
cover it?
Oh, yeah,
All right.
Proposed?
and even if it's
Thank you,
bigger,
Rex.
you can spend more. This is.
It's
like just a-
unanticipated, because
Right.
legally unanticipated.
That's right.
All
I'll
right,
second it.
Who
Wilks.
moved?
Wilks moved it.
All right, those in favor?
I,
Any opposed?
item number warrant article 6 for $81,717 is the fire station.
Payment,
This
we've
is
already
their
signed the
yearly
contract to do it.
payment, and you notice that the fire station will be paid off, we hope, in 2027. We're cruising.
Do I hear a motion for
Move.
the 81, whatever?
James.
6.
81717.
Any further discussion?
Who seconded it?
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, number 7 is the same situation, it's a fire truck, and it is, the fire truck will be paid off in 2025, and the amount is $82,252.
Do I hear a motion move and
So
second?
moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Okay, number 8, new highway truck this year, it's in the schedule, and it is $243,700.
That's an 8-wheeler? The big trucks,
It's a
5
regular-
tonners.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and is it replacing?
It's way less than it.
Boy, they're getting expensive. The first one time we bought one when I was a selectman was under 100K.
Yeah.
It's replacing a truck?
Yes.
Yes.
And
We're
is that,
trading in the 2011, I think it is.
and is that the purchase price?
Yes.
That's all paid up?
No, yeah, that would be a total payment of it.
Right.
We won't,
Comes out of the capital reserve fund.
comes out of the capital reserve fund,
And
so
it
that it's not
includes-
raised by taxes at this point in time.
The truck, the radio, everything.
Right, but that's, it's not, this is not.
It includes the plows,
No.
Yeah,
It's replacing.
and it's a ready-to-roll price.
great.
One time we tried to take the plow from one truck to the next one, and
Didn't
after
work out.
20 years or 15 years, it wasn't worth.
And you bought a new plow the next year,
A couple of years later, we just had to buy the plow.
I will move this.
Judy moved.
I'll second that, very expensive.
All right.
Thank you, Jen.
Those in favor of buying a new highway truck at 5 tons from the capital
Aye.
reserve?
Right.
Any opposed?
Item warrant article number 9 is a project for this year, the Goose Pond Road project, $240,000. and that also is coming out of a reserve fund, and I will move it.
Oh, that's all out of the reserve fund, it isn't a straight capital, it isn't a straight appropriation?
Right.
That's
What are we doing?
class
It's
5
all
roads
the class five
rehabilitation?
road, right, yeah.
Say again, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say that was all appropriated last year, right?
The
The Goose Pond Road project was
Goose
paid
Pond
for.
Road, no, what was paid for last
It's
year?
River Road.
River Road and
And
Market
Market.
Street paving.
Right, but I
Goose-
thought they were gonna do Goose Pond Road last year too, and for some reason they had
They,
to delay it, but the money was there for it.
It's in the capital reserve fund,
it's
it
in the
hasn't
capital
been spent.
reserved, but it's not, it needs to be voted this year.
Okay.
I'll have Dina check that, but I'm pretty
Okay.
sure.
And then you've
No,
got,
they had $100,000 from the year before that was used on River Road.
River Road and then
And
Market
Market
Street.
Street.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And so then this year is Goose Pond.
but this is all capital reserve,
Yes,
none of it
correct.
is to be raised by
It's not
taxes.
raised by taxes.
Correct.
Correct.
That's the critical one as far as I'm concerned.
Not this year. Have that money.
Yeah.
It does,
Before we vote on that, Judy, could you just describe what that project is? What,
Goose, my understanding is it has three pieces to the project. There is some of the road that is ready to have a final coat put on it, paving, and that will get done. And there is a piece
Drainage.
that has drainage, and then
The
there.
hill, Mark Hughes's hill,
Yep.
all
Yep.
drainage being done there.
And I think the third piece is.
So it'll get paved from the four corners out,
Yeah.
out to the top of the hill going down to Hughes Farm?
No, it'll get paved all the way.
All the way, I
All the
believe.
way. It's the hill first, drainage, then the next section needs a little extra work, and then it's paving the whole thing.
So
They're
it'll
gonna
be
get out
done,
to the town line?
Well, he's gonna go as far as where it's not,
The
where they tore
pavement,
tore it
no.
all up.
I
It'll
thought the
be
pavement
paved.
on Goose Pond Road
It'll
went
be
to the
paved.
town line.
I don't know if it does.
we're talking about from the four corners to the top of Hughes Hill, not going east from the four corners.
Correct,
Okay.
for the paving, right.
Oh, we're going west from Four
The
Corners.
paving is
Ah.
everywhere, they're putting a top coat on everything.
Everything that's paved now plus.
Yes, yes. This finishes the whole project. If the town,
Yeah,
if the
right.
town, if the
That's right.
town will vote for that.
Cross your fingers and toes.
Until,
Well, it's easier-
until it rains again, and that rain comes
How
pushing
come
down
we
the
have-
hill.
People are killing us.
If
They're so
10
sick of being on dirt
fails-
road.
Then they're only doing a section.
Well, that was.
Yeah, but if that's all coming out of the capital reserve fund,
Dick, you
why do
only-
we need a separate one? Can't we amend that 240 to 75K?
Because this is how
I
we
think
ended
it's-
up presenting it, cause it's less confusing.
I think it is cleaner to
Yeah.
say, okay, the whole project has failed, now we wanna do this piece of
Right.
the project. And I can't tell you which piece that is.
It's the hill, it's the hill.
75,000.
All right, because
It's
the other way of doing
it's
it,
the- It's the drainage and the dirt work on the hill and getting it ready for paving.
I mean,
because you could modify Article 9 to only recommend the $75,000 worth of work.
I understand. I'm just saying that the road that we're talking about from the four corners to the top of the Hughes, it's in such great shape because the work that was done beforehand was done so well, and it was done in accordance with the best engineering principles. We don't have to pave that to keep it as a good road, but I think we should, but that's different.
Well, you always put a top coat 2 years after the base coat.
Well, right, but the gravel surface
You're
as it
saying this
is,
is good.
has almost no potholes in it, it's a perfectly fine class 4 road or whatever that
Class
class,
5.
class 5 is.
Well, the people that live out there want it paved.
I'm not, I'm just,
Yeah, yeah.
if you're gonna pay part of it, it's not gonna be any more expensive.
I mean, one time it was paved all the way to the Hanover town line,
Well, it still is, Dick.
Yeah,
It still is,
but some of that pavement is in worse shape than a dirt road.
right.
Yeah, that is true, it's badly eroded.
Do we have a second? I moved this.
I'll
Do we
second
have,
it.
how do we,
Number 9, correct?
can we come back to
No.
Article 9? Are we gonna
Yes.
send 240 to the town meeting?
I'll second it.
All right, those in favor?
I,
Bill, was that you that seconded
I
it?
did.
Thank you.
All right, and I think I've got a unanimous if it comes out of the capital reserve. All right, and then we've got Article 10, which is if the 240 doesn't pass, then we'll only spend 75.
So you
This would
mean
be
if
if
9
9
fails?
fails, yeah.
I've been a
I
little
mean,
thrown
yeah.
off by
Yeah,
that.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's because I
Yeah.
changed
Oh, the
numbers,
way
that's why
that the
it
numbers
says
went.
10.
All right, so it's
Sorry.
if 9
Right.
fails.
Okay,
Correct.
do we have to approve that too, or recommend
Yes,
that
because
as
Yes.
well?
I think we
It's a
will because
separate
it's a
article.
separate article.
Okay,
Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Section.
Those in favor?
I,
Right.
All right, any opposed? Any abstain? All right, we have firefighting safety, that's coming out of that capital reserve fund also,
it
correct?
is indeed, $38,250.
And is that for the breathing devices?
It is
No.
also, it's more for gear, and it, by law now, it has to be replaced, I'm not sure if it's 5
But
years or
it's
10
breakout
years.
gear, isn't it?
And it's safety gear, and, they have some new members who need the gear, and so this is what they need.
And there's enough money in the fund to cover it.
Yes, there is.
All right.
And that, I'll tell you what's in there.
59,000.
Thank you.
All right, somebody's ahead of me. All
I
right,
will move it.
Judy, do we have a second?
I second it.
Thank you,
All those in
Brian.
favor of recommending it to the, sending it to public hearing?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, 4th of July, this is another out of the,
It comes, yeah,
out of the special revenue fund.
none of, well,
That's no
Right.
money raised by
no
taxes.
money raised by taxes, 6,983. If someone wishes to volunteer to do a Fourth
I
of
know, I
July
was thinking,
event.
we should have like a $21,000 party, cause we haven't had.
I know.
No, but-
Maybe then we'll get someone interested in
No, but the
like
only
really
revenue
setting
in it
something
is
up.
how many people pay for their chicken dinners.
Yeah.
That's where
At the
money came
4th of
from.
July.
There's no tax money that goes into that fund.
Did we charge for that board? Because we did the last 4th of July party with Lori and,
Yes, the food was charged for,
And the food was
and that's
charged
where
for?
this
Alright.
money came from.
I mean, it's
I'll move
CCL
it.
might do it.
Judy's
this year.
moved, do I hear a second for the 4th of July going to the
Thank
town
you,
meeting?
Rich.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, any abstain?
Okay, next up is warrant article 13 for $25,960. This also comes out of capital reserve or,
Conservation fund or DES grant?
no, but,
It's a state of New Hampshire grant for 50% of it, and the other 50% is coming from the milfoil revolving fund.
right, thank you.
Whatever, it's no
So
money
it's
to be
our
raised by
share.
taxes.
No money
That's all
to be,
Dick cares about.
I know.
Yes.
What I wanna hear is no money to be raised by taxes.
Wilkes just,
Okay, sorry, who moved it?
Bill, Wilkes and Bill.
The revolving fund is what was not spent last year?
Yeah, what's left in there is
17,000.
$16,094 or something dollars, but it's, we only need $12,960 for this. So there'll still be some left for the next year.
Those in favor of sending it to town meeting, to public
Public
hearing?
hearing? Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The cemetery gifts and donation fund, is that what this is?
Yeah.
I believe it is.
It's the Wise, what's left of the Wise.
15,991, and I will move it.
All right.
No money from taxes.
No money from taxes again, folks. Do I have a second there for Dina's
Yep,
record
Bill.
keeping?
The
Bill?
death is free.
Yes.
All those in favor of sending it to public hearing?
Aye.
Opposed? What's this zero for the FF agent? And Article 15.
It's for the firefighter, it's to, recommend that the agent be changed to the select board to spend out of that trust fund.
So there's no money
There's
there.
no money there, that's why I just.
So we
put
don't
that.
have a recommendation
We
on it.
don't have to do anything with
not.
that.
All right, Article
It's good for you
17.
to know though, what it is.
Article 16 is, we've been advised, we believe there will be a petition article to ask to have a townwide reappraisal. And if that is the case, and we hope that there will be some money for that, if it's in there, but if not, Article 17 is if that petition passes with no money, we
mean
have
six-
been,
Uh-huh.
if Article 16
16.
passes, Article 17, the cost of a 1-year outside company doing a townwide reappraisal is $99,500.
How much money is in the trust fund?
Didn't we just do a reappraisal?
We sure
Yes.
did.
We did.
The
How much
property,
money
it's,
now?
there's about 56,000 in there now.
All right, now, if we disapprove the 99,000 as a recommendation out of the budget committee, and they pass the petition article, the petitions, I saw it in the Lyme Country Store.
Yep.
There's no dollars in there for
That's right.
appropriation.
That's unfortunate.
Darn
And
it.
therefore, if there's no appropriation to pay for it, does it just become an advisory and not mandatory?
I don't think it's mandatory anyways.
Actually, I did ask the New Hampshire Municipal Association, they said that it would be a mandatory thing. And the thought was that from the floor, we could allocate some money. I think you just said there's 56,000 in the CRF now. We could put up another 50 from the floor.
DRA, I
It
don't
has
think
to
would
go-
approve it because it's not in the warrant.
Hey, here's the scoop.
It
If,
needs-
if you have a warrant article that's written with no monetary value, that it has to have it, you can't just slap money in it.
Right,
They won't let you,
You can't
they'll
do it.
turn it away and say, forget it. That's why
that's why
we
we
told them
have
that
this,
they should put money in
we,
there.
we did advise,
So,
I heard you say that,
Yeah.
and some of the other people that
Didn't want-
in our group said that it could be amended from the floor.
Yeah, they can
Well,
make the
you can
motion on the
amend-
floor, they can pass it. DRA would not approve it
because,
because it isn't
Right.
warned. And therefore, it would become a non-binding.
right.
So-
See, the
All right,
rules
well.
of putting out a warrant have to do with the fact that you need to have everything in the warrant that people can really see and know what they're considering. And if a warrant article is sitting there without any money attached to it, and you've advertised it, and people have considered it by meaning,
All right,
it
and that's,
ruins it.
that's really helpful information.
so, we know that we were advised that there would be a petition, and it would be calling for a full town
Yes.
reevaluation.
Yeah.
So we did find the cost of it. We also have concerns that if you take all the money out of the capital reserve fund, then you have nothing in there for the next time there's a
Well,
need for it.
but you would have another 5 years to accumulate more.
Possibly.
Unless you wanna do it again.
Well,
Well, it depends on what the
Well,
market
just
does.
to say,
Wait,
we
wait,
can't-
it
Sure,
depends
okay.
on
We
what.
also
So-
know that depending on where the numbers go, say we did it, and then in 2 years after that, the market had changed dramatically and we fell out of compliance, we'd have to do it again, and then we'd have no money, or we'd have
you'd
40,000.
have to raise the money at that point,
Right,
yes.
so
So-
I think it also, in my mind, to be perfectly fair, I want the money there, but I want people to know that this is a costly thing to be done. And
Yep, okay.
so, but that number can change. It can change right here from you folks, you cannot recommend it to go forward, or it can, that number could change from the floor as well.
All right, before I go further with it, because as it stands, the petition article becomes advisory only because there's no money appropriated with it if it passed as it's currently written.
We'll have to.
Because there's no money to accomplish it, so you can't do it.
Okay.
All right. Now, if the petitioners modify it,
Right,
then the problem is all the signatures they've got underneath the current language are invalid.
yes, exactly.
You need to start over.
Start over, right. Yep,
All right, now the next question I have is, are we currently in compliance in
Yes.
terms of our assessment townwide under the state regulation?
Our numbers?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And how many years does it have to go? 2,
I
3?
believe something that was sent out with all the information this afternoon
Yeah,
said,
what was that? I was
Yeah.
confused about
It's
that.
Dina can
It's
explain
a
it to you, but
preliminary, sorry, put my hair, a preliminary preliminary, figure of what it looks like our,
Our assessments are.
thank you, yes, but no, I'm trying to think of a different
The
word.
equalization ratio?
Thank you, that's it.
Right.
The equalization ratio.
So even with the assessment, they think we're at 83.8%?
Even with the what?
That we just did a 5-year
In
revaluation?
2021, we did.
Yeah.
So it's, then this will be 2, but the sales are
Yes.
fluctuating so that it's, that we could, let's say this
There aren't enough
passes,
sales to
and,
really get it.
well, there is,
I think
if
things
this
are coming back
passes
to
and we spend
reality.
$100,000, the next year, you could be, in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it maybe
It's-
maybe somebody here knows the answer to this question, but at some point I was told that if you drop below 80%, like that's when the municipal, whether it's municipal or
want you-
DRA,
DRA wants you to do
that's when they'll send you a letter and you may not be able to wait for that 5-year cycle, which is
Right,
what
right.
happened in Hanover, like,
Well,
somewhat.
Hanover was notorious.
Yeah, because
Okay,
they were
what-
really
what they'll
under
do
that
is, let's
number.
say, next year, when we do our equalization ratio, we're below that level.
Uh-huh,
They're gonna say to us, you need to do, and it could just be a cyclical, a partial, it could be a full.
mhm.
And it could cost 50,000 and it could cost 100.
Right, the partial update number was 45,400.
But it also depends.
How do you
It's
do a
like
partial?
If you're using your own assessor, it's less,
But we pay, right.
but we have to go out and find somebody to do the, the separate one, the reval, that's the extra one.
Full
The
townwide.
full townwide one, yeah.
And there, it could be that, let's just say petition passes,
Yeah.
99,000 passes, and then the company by mid-March might not be able to do it this year, it might be next year anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
fairly complicated process when you try and do one back on back of something else. And as Dina was saying, you don't have the town's assessor doing it, you have to hire an outside company, and they're usually a good bit more expensive.
Yes.
Right,
So
the other thing I'd like to say before
Uh-huh.
you chime in again, I think a lot of this goes from the misconception of the effect of a reassessment of either increasing or decreasing the assessed valuation of your house. And therefore, if your house is over-assessed, you say, oh my goodness, if I get a reassessment and it drops, my tax bill's gonna drop. And that's not the case.
So,
Because if your house either increases or decreases in value the same amount as everybody else's house, it's no change in your taxes.
Dick,
And that's a concept people do not understand.
well, Dick, so speaking for as one of the people that's putting forth this amendment,
Petition.
there is considerable, I'm gonna call them errors, just call a spade, in townwide in all the values. I don't wanna take the time of this committee, people can talk to me
Well-
after. So, you're right, people have a hard time understanding, wait, my house went up this much, but if everybody else went up that much, your taxes won't change. So I understand that. There were problems, I believe there were problems in the 21 revaluation. And so I believe they are sufficiently important that the more than 20 number that Jen mentioned. So that's why we are asking, and we will be building the case for it real soon.
All right, now, Jen, you had a question that I interrupted you on.
Oh, I guess I'm reading this and I don't understand it necessarily how the equalization, I've looked it up before too, how they come to that ratio, but did they use less than 20 sales last year and then looked at the assessed value relative to what the house sold for?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
here's
that's
what,
tough.
no, here's what,
That's
here's what the
that's tough to
hey, wait,
swallow.
Can I just say,
That
that's
doesn't
not,
fit Dina.
that's not correct.
For the ratio, but for the ratio.
If we have less than 20 sales,
Mhm.
the DRA will pull sales from prior
Mhm.
or after the date that the cutoff, the start date or the cutoff date, so that they have enough to really make whatever you wanna call it. I'm not gonna
Like
say.
a reasonable, or
Right, exactly. That's right.
accurate, if not
That's right.
precise.
That's right.
How do you do a partial?
A partial,
You just do a sampling or something?
yeah, for sections of the town.
Or you do a particular area where, I remember one year we did waterfront properties, because it was a big thing that they were all under assessed, because there was no kick up in value for being waterfront, for example.
I had a question, for Rich. Rich, how many people who had mistakes on their appraisal appealed them?
There were about 51 abatement requests that went in.
How many of them were approved?
They weren't done because there were mistakes on them, but anyways, I mean, having errors is way different than thinking that you'd like to apply for an abatement. But, there
Aside from
were
abatements, how many people appealed the assessment?
none.
Okay, thank you.
Wait,
Besides.
An abatement
an
is.
abatement.
Just-
No, that's
just,
different.
just a second, I wanna, how many people filed abatement requests?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe there are 51.
There were 61.
61.
And how many of those were adjusted one way or another?
I don't know, I'd have to look that up.
Well, roughly.
Anywhere from $50 to a couple thousand, and probably.
But how many
How
of
many
them?
I'm
of
thinking.
them?
Oh,
I'm thinking.
I'm sorry,
It's
yeah.
not right on the end of my head, tip of my
I
brain.
had not expected this question.
No, I had not expected it.
And we had it,
And instead of guessing, I'd rather look it up and let you know.
Well, I mean, it's
I
important
think
to
it's-
vote on this warrant article, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, but we don't need to vote on it as a committee, right?
we can just
Like, we'll
move
vote
it
Yes,
on it
forward.
at
we
the
do. We
town.
need to move it forward as either,
I see.
You
we
need to
have to
vote
be
on the
reasonable. In other words, if we move it forward as 99,000, we're really changing the spirit if we then vote 0 next week. Or vice versa, if we move it forward at 0 and then vote 99, we haven't really allowed people to come to the public meeting with a realistic as to the way the board is thinking. That's why I said we only worry about like 8.4 million for the school, because we can move that around a little bit. But in this particular combination, we're basically
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
the one
0
side.
or 100,000.
Where would that money come from? Taxes?
And
Tax.
only 2/3 of it can come out of the trust fund, basically, because that's all that's in the trust fund. And what we have currently is we're not required to do it by state regulations.
Right.
And on that basis, I would move, we don't make a vote on Article 15, because there's no dollars in it as the petition currently is.
Article 16.
So we're talking about Article 16, 17 rather. And I would, because the state does not require us to do it by regulations based on our current figures, I would vote for 0 funding.
You wanna make a motion to?
And I will move for 0 funding.
But didn't
Second.
you just say,
Second.
And Bill seconds. So now
So
that's
you're
what's,
gonna, so
I have a question.
zero funding means there won't be an Article 17.
that is, no, there'll be, Article 17 can be there with 0 funds recommended. The selectmen asked for 99,000 and the budget committee recommends 0.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
0 goes to the floor.
So,
James has a
one,
question.
so, one part of my question is, this is, the select board is recommending the 99,000.
Only
The other-
if the petition
If the
article
petition
passes.
okay. So the other question was, from this discussion, because I know nothing about this topic, but it sounds like we might be required by DRA to do an assessment anyway.
We get a year or two
Well, we
notice.
don't
They
know.
give us a notice and then we have to
It-
appropriate the money
It depends
subsequently.
it depends on what the sales do and what the equalization ratio comes out. If
Okay.
that gets below a certain percent, which is generally 80, and then there's other factors in there too, it's not just
Okay.
that.
But otherwise, we'd be looking at
Otherwise-
2024,
2026,
2026.
We do it
every 5 years,
5 years.
unless you hit a mark.
Right, I see.
and they tell us.
In other words,
get on here.
what,
Check.
what Bill and I are saying is,
Oh,
we should go to the public hearing with the budget committee recommending 0.
Right.
And the reasoning behind that recommendation is that we are not required to do the reassessment by the state regulations, number one. And number two is we have to raise 30,000 plus of that cost with this year's taxes, because there isn't enough money in the
And I think
fund to pay for
I
it.
think it's important to say that as we go down the road, as things change, sales change, if they do, I mean, they could get crazier than they are now. People could be begging to pay you 100,000 more for your property than you're asking, which is happening, but it could get worse and worse.
Yeah, but it's going the other way right
And-
now.
and-
It's- yeah, it's
I know it
starting
is,
to-
but let me just finish my point. The point is, whichever way it goes, if it goes drastically enough, the DRA is gonna say to us, your numbers are not okay now, so you have to do it. And it may happen before 26, we don't know.
But my position is until DRA requires it, I don't think we as a budget committee can recommend spending the money to do it. That's what I'm trying to say.
I understand.
I guess my question, and maybe this is more for the petitioners, is I'd like to know the proportion of people who applied for an abatement and actually got an abatement in any amount of money. Because that feels, that to me seems informative about, it's a very small sampling, but probably, I did not file for an abatement, because I do not have time for these kinds of things, but I did look at,
Right.
like, how particularly my land assessment went up, and it didn't make a lot of sense.
So
Everybody's land is
But-
going up.
is it
Right, but mine went up like 73%.
But the issue
You know,
is,
but in
did it
any
go
case, but
up
it's fine.
all over, or did it just go up in your neighborhood?
Just in my neighborhood.
That's unfair, no, it didn't, it went up all over.
No, those types of increases were just in my neighborhood, cause
Well,
I've talked to
ours
several
did.
people, but it
Ours
doesn't
did
matter,
too.
and it's like beyond the scope of conversation here.
Yes.
But again, does the petitioned article, will that have money, will that have a money raise? It cannot have a money raise?
If they're already getting signatures on the petition.
Oh, it's too late.
Do it.
I
Well,
would
They'll
say-
have to recirculate
they
it
do another
again.
petition. Right, we would have to recirculate it, yes.
You'd have to recirculate it with the money in the petition.
Right, and then you need to
And
know
then
how
we as a
much.
budget committee would have to vote to recommend or not recommend the petition article separately. We're only based on the current thing that's circulating.
You have till February 7th to submit your
Yeah.
petition.
But wait a minute, if
So-
Article 17, which is the 99.5 from the board, which if the board ends up supporting that, leaving that on the warrant, it's still gonna be there.
It's
And
just-
it's just gonna say the budget committee doesn't recommend
I know,
this.
but the floor
So
could
the
vote
town
for
and the floor
99,000.
can
Right.
still vote that, or
Gotcha.
half of it, or
Yeah,
whatever.
thank you for that clarification.
Dick, I have one more comment for Dina.
John's been waiting.
Dina, could you, I beg your pardon.
Go ahead.
Could you, at the public hearing, prepare whatever whatever the total
Yes.
reduction in the grand list is? That's Vermont terms, but you know what I mean.
The change,
For the abatements, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What total dollars resulted from the abatements?
yeah, I don't know if that's a fair way to look at it, but sure.
We can
because
have that
one or
number-
two can be huge
and
and
we
a
can
bunch
have-
of others can be 50
I know,
bucks.
but
The number of abatements and how many were granted.
what we're trying to get a sense here is how flawed, if you wanna use that terminology, was the assessment.
But this is what's so
Separate.
difficult about it, is that it's so complicated in the whole way they all do it. DRA, the assessors, all that, everything's
We know that,
calculated,
but-
figured. That looking at 61 abatements, and if they got 25, where you got, like I said, anywhere from $50 to $2,000, what is that gonna tell you? That's not gonna tell you anything.
It's all we have though.
No,
I
I don't
guess.
think so.
Well, it does
I think I
tell
can
you
get some
something,
other
it tells
info.
you that
So why do we need to spend $100,000
the tax,
if it's
some
bad?
people's, it tells you that some people's tax bill was extraordinarily high.
Well,
Well,
ours
some
is-
granted,
people's property
somebody-
is
If
external.
you gave somebody
Right.
$2,000 off their tax bill, that's pretty significant.
What was it, $2,000 off of the,
Assessment.
$40,000
It
tax
was
bill or
off their
$2,000 off of
assessment,
$4,000?
assessment.
It's assessment.
$2,000 off of $3,000.
Yeah, that's
No,
significant.
you didn't
No,
mean
but
tax
it's
bill,
not.
you meant
No.
assessment.
I was talking about
Not
assessment.
assessment.
Assessment, not tax bill.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Be careful.
I guess my concern about this one is that, it's almost like we're, it's almost like we're improving the petition by putting that money in,
Well,
and
that's a
that
thought.
would be yeah.
We certainly didn't wanna do that.
I guess my feeling is, if it's bad, the DRA is gonna make us do it again.
Right.
It's gonna cure itself by time. And third of all, why do we have to spend $100,000? We happen to have very high taxes, and I think they're too high. But that's life in the big city, and it's gonna cure itself, and it's very complicated, you know.
Dick, he's been waiting.
Yeah, Tom?
I think to move this along, I have my own opinions on this, but it seems very reasonable what Dick suggested, that our budget committee can't get on top of this issue tonight. We can't, it's had a lot, it's already complex. The assessor has his methods, but it's a warrant article that's gonna come up, and it will be discussed, and then the budget can be part of that discussion at the town meeting, and also there's another significant issue that we haven't mentioned, that January 26th, the select board has invited the DRA here to answer questions. And that's gonna also bring a lot of light to this, I hope, and understanding to the town. So I think tonight, it's very reasonable that the budget committee not try and decide what's best and just do what Dick suggested, pass it on for a discussion at the next meeting.
So what, if I understood
Which
right,
means,
John?
he
I
said.
would like, the motion I think is on the floor that Bill seconded mine, is to go
With
to the
zero
public
dollars.
hearing with zero funds in this article.
No, recommending, the budget committee
Amend is zero, yeah.
recommend zero,
Or just not recommend them.
does not recommend.
We would be not recommending the article.
Right.
Because we're doing it all
You're
the
just
way.
not recommending the
It's
article.
not like
do his
we're
position
recommending
if he wants to.
45,000.
Right, we can always.
He's got plenty of.
Yeah, yeah.
So this would be.
I amend my
not
second, Dick,
Okay, so.
to your new language,
Just say,
Not recommend the article.
not recommending the
Said
article.
not recommend on number
17.
So we should vote
17.
on that.
So Dick moved and Bill seconded.
Right.
All right.
What's the motion exactly?
To not
To not
recommend.
recommend Article 17.
okay.
Not to
So,
recommend
Article 17
I
says.
see, okay, to raise the money.
Article
99.
17 says 99,500,
Mhm.
and the budget committee,
Is-
if,
Is not recommending that article.
and
That
so,
one.
So he's
let,
difficult when you put it
let me just say
negative.
the whole thing out. So the article will say, Article 17 will say 99,500 if Article 16 passes,
Correct.
and the budget committee does not recommend this.
And the
We haven't
selectmen,
voted yet.
we haven't voted.
No, we
Public
haven't, I
hearing.
just want to clarify the
All
motion.
right, if, as a result of the public hearing,
Yes,
what we're sending to the public hearing of not recommending this article stands, then it will appear that way on the public, on the warrant.
okay.
All right, that the selectmen recommended 99.5,
Mhm.
and the budget committee did not recommend that, i.e. recommended zero.
Okay,
I won't say recommended zero, I'll say not recommended by the budget committee,
okay, good.
which is equal to a zero.
That's-
But the money, the 99.5 will show up on the warrant.
Yep, okay. That's.
So therefore, you could overrule the budget committee's
Mhm.
recommendation. Whereas if we just chopped Article 17 off the warrant in total,
Mhm.
then there'd be no way with the current wording of the petition article to get the money to carry it forward,
Okay,
But you could do a new petition,
we could do a new petition.
which would include the money.
Yep.
But as long as the selectmen control the warrant, they can put that 99.5 on the warrant.
Mhm.
And from what Judy was saying, they intend to do that.
Well, that was the last conversation we had, I mean, like.
Makes
So-
sense, because then you get the number out there.
and-
That gets the number out there, and it gets the budget committee saying it's not required by state regulations, so therefore we shouldn't do it.
So,
And you don't wanna be stuck with no money to do it.
I would,
You have
I
to
would
take it out of
support
regular
that
budget.
motion, 99.5 on the warrant, the budget committee does, if it doesn't, right, and the budget committee does not recommend it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we're voting on.
Right,
okay.
all right. Those in favor?
Uh,
Any opposed?
None opposed.
Judy and Sue opposed.
And,
And me.
and Jen.
Forget about me. It's not often you get a no
Were
from
you
me.
opposed to?
Yes, she was.
Okay.
It's difficult to vote on
I'll
a
vote.
negative,
Who
right?
It's Judy, Sue, Jen, who voted no?
That's it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
That's
correct.
it.
Three, all right.
Those three.
No hard feelings. Well, you know you love
All
us
right.
anyway.
Now, before we adjourn, I just wanted to say, I believe Bill and Sue, your terms are up this year. So
Depends on
that
who you
have-
believe.
What?
Depends on who you believe.
I know.
If you read the members on the budget committee on the town webpage, we're good until 2025.
Well,
Wow.
according
Yes, that's what it
to,
says.
according to the town clerk, who
I
sent
know.
me a message about it,
I know that.
your terms are up.
Well, I assume that Patty is better informed than whoever maintains the webpage for the town. But
Well, it'd be
I'm
nice.
just, Judy,
It'd be
don't take
nice, you know,
offense.
if commi-
Just
if
saying,
committee
it's-
chairs would get
All right.
on the web
I
and
And
don't
also,
take
get
offense
John,
at
I-
all. I
our
agree
web
with you.
Basically, we had your
all the updated stuff.
said that you would resign effective town meeting, or your intention was to resign effective town meeting. And I think this would be the appropriate time for us to say thank you for your year of
Yes.
service. And we're sorry that you're not gonna be with us another year after public hearing will be your last chance to put me in.
And you can change your mind.
Thank you,
You can always change your mind, just see Patty.
thank you.
Judy and I could lose our voting status after this legislative session, so if you want,
may be
if you
I'm
want
voting
us to
on
not
it.
be ex officio, let your voice be heard.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, they have their- Yeah,
Well, gee,
because
that
we're
way-
representatives, we're not elected by the town to sit on the budget committee, but our town recognizes us as voting members, but there's a bill in the House, I think, that wants to strip us of our voting right. And we
Yeah.
would still be here as representatives, of course, because.
Yeah, well, there was a
obviously.
bill in the House to end COVID vaccinations at one point in
Well,
time too.
there's all sorts of, like, there are some good bills and also some nutty bills out there too.
All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn at 9:05?
So moved.
Okay, well, which one gets it?
Does incumbency
Who
mean
was
you're running
first?
again, or
Jim.
that doesn't mean
Jim.
it just means?
No, it just means
And
that
then
my
who
term is up
seconded
this
it?
year.
So how do we find out
Bill
who's running,
seconded.
if incumbents are running? I just ask.
Oh, I have to go see Patty and say I want my name on the
He just
ballot.
signs the thing and he shows up on the ballot.
What's your intention?
So, did we never voted
This is
to
so much
adjourn?
fun. What else would I do Wednesday night?
Good
So,
point.
as a curiosity, don't take this as a flag